Omathyana Tingandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nititanya Manovistam Sthapitamina Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vansha Kalpatarupyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I hope you all had a wonderful week and you got to reflect on some of the messages we talked about. Anybody had like a life-changing kind of insight or a major insight that you'd like to share? Just even from our discussion last week. It doesn't have to be life-changing, but sometimes it can happen. Anything? Yeah. Okay. All right. I was very much reflecting on just mistakes, that we make mistakes. And so I kind of became very aware through the week. Every time somebody pointed to me some mistake, I was more gracefully accepting it. Yes, I'm human. I make mistakes, you know. So I don't know if anyone else had some simple experience like that, but it was really nice. You know, you can just, if you accept these simple truths, life can become a little easier. Your perspective changes. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen and we'll start today's session. So this is where we stopped. We discussed about the Vedas, the Vedic literature, where ISOPANISAD fits in the whole Vedic literature. And we discussed, you know, what are the Vedas and all that. And the four human, you know, what are the imperfections or defects. And we stopped here, different ways of acquiring knowledge. So there's two broad processes, right? One is called the Arahapanta, as Prabhupada talks about it. It's the ascending or the inductive process. Where's my thing not working? Okay. So it's acquiring knowledge by our own endeavor with using our imperfect senses or, you know, research or experiments and so on. And this is the common way of acquiring knowledge in this world, right? All the scientists, all the philosophers, this is how, you know, we acquire knowledge. This is how we go about living our life usually, right? And it's kind of sometimes like, you know, like in gymnastics, they climb a rope, right? And you climb the rope with your own strength, but sometimes your muscles kind of fail you. And when your muscles fail you, you come down very fast down the rope. And if you're not smart enough to kind of let go of the rope, you can really like bruise your hands and feel the heat in your hands and feel the redness and blisters and so on. And this is actually the danger in the ascending path, because we just simply don't have enough power and there's every chance of just falling down, right? And Prabhupada writes in the purport, he quotes Brahma Samhita. He speaks about how, you know, we may travel at the speed of mind for millions of years, or Brahma speaks about it and Prabhupada is quoting it. Pantasta koti satavatsara sampragamya, right? You may travel at the speed of mind for millions and millions of years or lifetimes, but you may not even be able to approach the tip of the toenail of Vishnu. You just cannot approach the lotus feet of the Lord through that method. And the mind is very, very swift. Like one time Prabhupada, when he came here, one American lady asked Prabhupada, "Oh, Prabhupada, Swamiji, I see that you're missing your home, you're missing India. And Prabhupada said, yes, I'm missing Vrindavan, but when I think of Vrindavan, I'm there right away in Vrindavan. So we can be with our mind anywhere so quickly. The mind is very powerful, and yet we cannot approach the Lord through that means. And, Prabhupada gives the example in the purport of, one can try to find if the man is mortal or not by studying, right? This ascending process. You have to study every single man. I mean, is that a possibility to do some research or testing on every single man in this world? I mean, so difficult. So this is the normal path and that we use in, day-to-day life. And people use the same method even in approaching or finding the absolute truth. And that is also only if people believe in the absolute truth. Most people don't even believe in the absolute truth. They never even ask the question about something beyond this material world. They're just busy trying to find happiness in this world, or, more than that, it's usually just trying to avoid suffering. So, but when people really want to know the absolute truth because of what they're used to, they use the same method. And then there is the avaroha panta, which is the descending or deductive process. And this is the knowledge that we acquire by hearing from an authority. And we'll talk about that a little later. But let's go into the two kinds of, well, there's three kinds of evidence, but then there's two kinds of aroha panta, and then there is one that is under avaroha panta, which is shabda praman. So praman basically means it's the means of knowing something, or it's ascertaining a fact. And in English, the word for it is epistemology, right? How do you know what you know? What's the evidence? What's the basis of what you know? So pratyaksha praman is one of them. We'll go through it quickly because it's quite easy to understand. So pratyaksha praman is direct perception. And direct perception means we are utilizing our senses, to see, to hear, to touch, to smell, to taste. That's something we do all the time. But along with the senses, it also includes the mind. And, just like, we're just kind of sitting somewhere and suddenly like we turn our head and we perceive the presence of someone and we turn our head. We were not thinking with our intelligence, somebody was supposed to be here or something like that. But, suddenly our mind perceives. It's not even like our senses. You just feel it. And then you see that the person is actually looking at us. So this is direct perception with the mind. It's not that, we were using our intelligence. And we also know that sometimes we perceive things with the mind, but those things are not necessarily true. Sometimes we perceive things, sometimes we also perceive that somebody is there behind us, but there is nobody. And that perception is wrong because, sometimes it's just coming based on some previous past impressions and so on. So we know that because the senses are imperfect, the mind also cannot always perceive properly. So then this means of evidence is imperfect. It's an evidence we need, and it's an evidence that we don't totally reject in our life. And yet, this is an imperfect way of approaching. And it's the means most of the scientists are using to ascertain the truth. And the next is Anuman Praman. Anu means, I think you all know by now, Anu means to follow, right? And Man means mind. So Anuman means we're following the mind. So how are we following the mind? The things that we are trying to know, we're trying to know through the workings of the mind. So basically through logic or speculation, kind of association of ideas, thinking, imaging, these kind of processes, where we're using the mind. And if you use the same example that we used before about perceiving the presence of the person next to you, and then we continue with this Anuman, then we might think, oh, how did the person find out I was sitting here? How did they know I was here? Or who is he? Or, where did he come from? I wonder if he knows me, right? So in this way, we tend to we perceive something with our senses, then, Anuman usually follows Pratyaksha. So we speculate and think based. Or sometimes Prabhupada gives the example. You see a hill in a distance, and then we see something white above that hill or a mountain. And then we're thinking, oh, that must be smoke. And then when is usually smoke there? Smoke is usually there when there's a fire. So then we think, oh, there's fire in the mountain. So you're using the senses, and then you're using your logic, right? And what is the example Prabhupada gives in the purport for Anuman Praman? Gives the example of, anybody quickly? It gives the example of Darwin evolution, right? So one thing about Anuman is that you can, again, never be sure. Maybe it's like this, maybe it's like that, right? It's a suggestion, and it's not perfect. And also, logic is something that can never actually lead to new information, right? It only tells us where things are, how these things are fitting together or not. And it basically helps us put together things. But everything that we received newly, right? Like anything new, that's actually something that we have heard. And then we use logic to apply it further. So like, we're reading Prabhupada's purports, and we're reading verses in the Bhagavad Gita and so on. So we're reading it. So basically you're hearing something, and then you're using your logic to understand it. So again, we don't reject logic, but we have to try to understand what is its scope, right? And another thing about using Pratyaksha Anuman is that it has this nature to increase our false ego in a way. Whereas when you're using Shabda Praman, which is basically hearing, it's a descending process, it increases humility, because Pratyaksha and Anuman means that I'm using my faculties, right? So if I'm able to figure out something using my faculties, then naturally, then I tend to think that I'm great. My pride increases, my ego increases in some way, right? So now, what's the problem with the ascending process? It's defective, as we know, imperfect senses, we make mistakes, speculative power, logic are limited, and we can't even get the proper understanding of things in this world using logic. We're so limited, right? Like Prabhupada gives the example of, you don't even know what's going on in the next room, when there's a wall in between, because of limited senses. And I already spoke about this. Logic can never produce new information. It only helps, to put things together. So we can conclude that Pratyaksha Anuman can hardly give us this real understanding. So then what about Shabda Praman? Shabda Praman is, as we know, the descending process. It's hearing the words of an authority. So I don't know, in my book, which is really old, my book is 20 years old. My pages are falling apart. But in my book, it's page 7, where Prabhupada kind of paraphrases a quote. Just read it. Therefore, the Vedic injunction is that one must approach the word compulsory. One must approach. The word compulsory is used, a bona fide spiritual master, a guru. And what is the qualification of a spiritual master? He's one who has rightly heard the Vedic message from the right source. And he must practically be firmly established in Brahman. These are the two qualities he must have. Otherwise, he's not bona fide. Anybody knows what's the verse he's paraphrasing? Just unmute and speak. Oh, I can't be heard very well. I'm just looking at the chat message now. Is my voice loud enough or not?
Mataji, you're very mild, Mataji. If you're a little louder, that will be really very nice.
Yeah. Does everyone feel like that, or only Vijaya Vrindavan?
It's fine for me. It's fine.
Hear well, Mataji.
Yeah, Mataji, we are fine.
I'm able to hear.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, fine. All right, so I think it's fine. Yeah, so anybody knows this verse that Prabhupada is paraphrasing? Very, very important verse. No, not
Yasya
yet.
prasadat bhagavat prasado, that sloka, Mataji.
Yeah, that's nice. That's a nice verse. But that's not what Prabhupada is quoting. This is a verse often quoted during initiations and so on. Tat vijnanartam saguram eva bigachit samit pani shrotriyam brahmanishtam. So I think I have it on the next slide. So anyway, so this tat vijnatam, one second. So words or sounds of Vedas, words of liberated souls. So here's the verse. So what does this verse mean? To understand things properly, we must humbly approach with firewood in hand a spiritual master who's learned in the Vedas and firmly devoted to the absolute truth. So there is this word eva bigachit in Sanskrit. This is like a very strong word. It says, certainly, he must. So one must approach the spiritual master. And there are two things here as far as the qualifications of spiritual master. One is Shrotriyam. Shrotriyam means that he must have heard, and Brahmanishtam means that he must have realized the Brahman, right? So basically, this submission to an authority, or the submissive attitude of hearing and accepting in disciplic succession, is extremely important. And practically speaking, it's the most important thing for spiritual progress. We don't really need any other qualifications. We don't have to be super intelligent or super skilled or anything. Although if we have certain gifts that Krishna has given us, we can offer them in Krishna's service. But it doesn't matter what we have, what we don't have. But if we can submissively approach the spiritual master and accept his authority, right? It's the most amazing thing we can do for ourselves in our lives. Even a child, he can accept disciplic succession and make tremendous spiritual progress. He may not have a lot of intellectual understanding sometimes, the child, but he has grown a lot. He has realization because of this principle. But of course, the authority has to be reliable, something that Prabhupada would repeat over and over and over again. And we spoke last week about how knowledge is only as reliable as its source. And it's actually very, very natural for human beings to accept authority, right? Like even as children, we're always looking up to the adults, right? Like mother may say, okay, fire burns. And we usually just accept it. We don't question it too much, right? But it's just that, okay, in our material life, our authorities have failed us so much. So therefore, it becomes very difficult for us, especially in Kali Yuga, to accept the spiritual authorities naturally because, there's so much mistrust in our heart. But accepting authority, Prabhupada says, it's very, very intelligent. In fact, first-class intelligence is to learn by hearing. And, like Krishna describes the different varnas. And of all the varnas, two are considered to be the higher class, the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. Right? So what's the real difference between these two varnas, the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas, Shudras? The main difference between the two is in their intelligence. And so when there is intelligence and you apply this intelligence, what's the natural conclusion of intelligence is that I don't know enough. I can't do much. I can't figure out. And so they have this intelligence. And so because of that, then they accept authority and they get so much knowledge. But when we are in the lower modes, too much influenced by passion and ignorance, there is much insecurity also in the heart. And so because of that insecurity, it's very difficult for us to just simply say, I don't know, and I want to learn, right? The tendency is to think that I know everything because, especially nowadays in Kali Yuga, right? Like if I say I don't know, maybe I'll be fired from the job or whatever. So we always have to project ourselves in this world like we know much more than we do, because those are the people that seem to kind of get ahead. Of course, the culture is changing in some corporate, sectors. But yeah, this intelligence means that actually we come to the conclusion that I don't know much, and therefore I seek help. And, when back in the old days, when people join Krishna consciousness and they would join the ashram, right? And the first thing they were taught practically is how to accept an authority. But now with congregational preaching, it's sometimes very difficult to teach this principle. And it has become even more difficult, I would say, in the last, 10 years, 5-10 years, even more since the whole internet, social media age, where information is so easily available. So it's naturally, people feel that, why do I need to submit to anyone? I can figure it out by myself. So like I said, when we are using pratyaksha and anuman, it increases our ego, our false ego. So then naturally there's lesser submission and people don't want to accept authority. It's the whole culture has changed. Like I started Krishna consciousness a little over 20 years ago, like late 90s. And, there's so much change in the whole culture and the outlook of people. Like I remember, like spiritual master means we would just just whatever he said, there was no question. We would just follow it. And there was no question of doubting or anything like that. Anyway, our whole life, if we want to make further and further progress, we have to accept authority. But of course, we have to make sure that the authority is reliable. So it's our duty to find a bona fide authority, and authority has to be reliable. Just a second. Oops. All right, something happened to my slide here. Oh, here it is. Okay. So then how to receive authority? So we know this triangle, right? The triad, Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. So we can ascertain the words of Sadhu on the basis of Guru and Shastra. And sometimes when we read Shastra and we cannot understand, then we go to Guru and Sadhus. And then we go to Guru, but if we don't know at all, if we have no clue what Shastra says, there's no means really of verifying. So then what happens is that either we may not follow what Guru says because it doesn't feel good to me. We use again our Pratyaksha and Anuman. It doesn't feel good or it doesn't fit my logic, right? So either we won't follow or we'll follow blindly. And of course, we can check with sadhus, but without reading Shastra, it's also a little difficult to have faith in both sadhu and guru. So very, very important actually to study Shastra regularly, because otherwise we cannot verify and our faith will just remain very kind of kanishta kind of faith, very komal faith, very pliable faith. And that's the main difference. One of the main differences between kanishta, madhyam, and uttam, right? It's their knowledge of the Shastras and of course realization too. So again, when we speak of sadhus, who are they? Sadhus, of course, it can be our own God brothers, God sisters, other devotees. We don't necessarily have to go to the guru for everything. There's many older devotees, and it also means previous acharyas. So the guru must also speak based on what previous acharyas are speaking. So Prabhupada really wants us to understand that this Shabda Praman is actually the most reliable. And he gives several examples. He gives the example of a mother that, we just accept what the mother says. If you want to find out your father, you just go ask your mother. Or he gives the example of the radio station guide. If you just go to the authorities, they'll give you the radio station guide. Perhaps this example is a bit obsolete nowadays because many of the younger generation, they don't even know what a radio is, I think. Or they may know what a radio is, but we don't use it. I don't know if there's radio station guides. There must be. So anyway, the advantages of accepting Shabda Praman, it saves us a whole bunch of time. We can avoid mistakes and it just makes things very, very easy. So I want to ask you now, what Praman do we accept in Krishna consciousness? It's a simple question, so don't think too hard.
Shabda Praman Mataji.
But, okay, we use Shabda Praman. So do we use other methods or no? Do we use Pratyaksha and Anuman at all, or we don't?
We use all of them, Mataji.
I think no, Mataji, because that is, yeah. Shabda Praman Matra.
Okay, so tell me, when do we use Pratyaksha, when do we use logic, and when do we use Shabda, or how should we use them? What is the proper use in Krishna consciousness? We do use all of them. That's a fact.
Mataji,
But when should...
Hanuman Pranam, it's like reading scriptures and finding the logic, and after hearing and putting it into practice.
Okay. So when you're studying scriptures,
Yeah.
we are using Pratyaksha too. We're seeing with our eyes, right?
Yeah.
When we're hearing classes, we're using our ears.
Yeah.
We are, taking darshan of the deities every morning. That's Pratyaksha. That's, we're using our eyes. So we use all of them. We go to the temple, we use our sense of touch to figure out the road and so on, right? We move about using our Pratyaksha Praman. And we use logic also. So basically for day-to-day kind of activities, right, and decisions, we use Pratyaksha and Anuman. But Shabda as we understand, is the highest source. So anytime we want to make, major decisions for absolute knowledge, then we must use Shabda, right? So this is just something for us to think about. How are we operating when we are making decisions in our life? Of course, we use Pratyaksha Anuman, but is the Pratyaksha and Anuman guided by Shabda or not? Are we being guided by Shabda or not? So just like the example, okay, we're reading Shastra, we're using Pratyaksha and Anuman, but we are, what we are reading is Shabda. So it's being guided by Shabda. So this is something for us to reflect in our life on just day-to-day decisions. What's our guiding force? Is it just how I feel, what I like, or am I being guided by Guru Sadhu Shastra, right? Now, I want, if possible, a little group exercise. If we could break all of you into groups. I really totally forgot how to do this. There's, here, breakout rooms. Okay, so just a simple exercise, just for fun, to apply what we've heard. We'll take about 5 minutes in the breakout room and we'll come back out and then discuss for maybe another 5-6 minutes. So everybody knows what's gulab jamun, right? You've eaten and so on. So I would like you to, discuss maybe groups of maybe 3. So this gulab jamun, using these 3 pramans, what would be, you have no clue about how to make it, okay? Although you might have tasted it or seen it, but you have absolutely no clue. So you're going to use Pratyaksha Praman and figure out the process and see what results may come. You have to use Anuman Praman to figure out the process, and then Shabda to figure out the process. So I want you to see how it kind of turns out by using these 3 different methods. So the process, the results, and then we'll come to some conclusions in the end. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
Okay. So I think I have to make how many breakout rooms? Let's see. Let's do, 12 breakout rooms. Yeah. All right. So you'll see a join. Just click the
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Mataji, some disturbance in your side, Mataji. Rasika Mataji.
Yeah.
This so in this activity, I actually said that in the first type where we actually use the view, the picturization and seeing, and then we try to get the result. Like if you want to make a gulab jamun, you see how they do it in the video or something, and then you try to do it. Wherein we may attain perfection or may not attain perfection. The second one, we actually use our intelligence, our own mental concoction, and try to get the result, but still we may not actually perfectly get the result. But in the third one, actually the person or guru, when we take the guidance, we take the perfect instruction, we follow the instructions, we do it in front of them, and then we actually try to get the result. By this, we are actually attaining the perfect knowledge. So it is actually the third type of praman, which we actually get the perfect knowledge. So this is what the activity was about, and we took a break. Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Good. I would say that you actually use Shabda because you said you were trying to see someone making it.
Yes, yes.
So that's you actually went to Shabda and then you used your Pratyaksha.
Okay.
So Pratyaksha means that, okay, I see the gulab jamun, I taste it, and I have to figure out how to make it without seeing somebody make it. So let's see what flour or what else other people used. maybe another one or two.
So Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Who is this?
But, Hare Krishna Mataji, Amol here.
Hare Krishna. Yes, please speak.
So the way we discussed in room 4 is if we want to make gulab jamun just by having it once, that is a pratyaksha praman.
Right.
The second one,
Did you make
uh,
it? How did it turn out?
no, it will turn out very bad, definitely.
But you didn't attempt it.
Yeah, we did not attempt it.
Okay.
The second one is based on a test which we get once we eat that, and we try to infer whether what are the ingredients maybe and things like that. That is the Anuman Praman. Basically, it is having a sugar in it. It's soft, so it will have kava or some sweet ingredient in it. But we may not able to come to a conclusion that it is actually a fried one because it is very soft. So those kind of mistake we may it may lead to. And the third pramana we will be actually reading it, the recipe, or looking at a YouTube how exactly it has been done, and then we try to make it. So that will be the best. But the other side of it is if we just go by Shabda Pramana, then initially we cannot imagine what exactly we are trying to get there. Whereas if we go directly Pratyaksha Pramana, we will get to know the taste of it, and we can understand what exactly the end result we are trying to
Is
achieve.
it important? My question is it important that we have to imagine, we have to figure out by our own capacity? Is it important? Like, I want to make a gulab jamun, and is it okay that I just go to somebody who knows? Or is it very important that I have to figure it out by myself? What does it do?
I think it is.
Why do we have to figure it
go
out?
to someone and understand from expert. If we understand, that is a best thing to do.
Yeah, I'm asking this question because we all sometimes, especially in the current day and age, we have this tendency really to kind of figure out things by ourselves. We hesitate to ask. Okay, I'll just go here, I'll go there, Google it. And you also said YouTube, rather than just going to the person who made this expert gulab jamun. We rely so much, on Google and whatever else, and our mind and senses, So it's just a little exercise to kind of see how we operate, even something so simple. Then what to speak of spiritual subject matters, right? Yeah. Okay, and we're almost done with this introduction.
Mataji,
so
I
just
have a
another
question
yes
in relation to the exercise and the question that you asked at the very end. Inquisitiveness is a natural instinct, I would say, for a human being. So even from a spiritual, even if one is following the spiritual path, that need to experiment and try things out, I guess to a certain extent is unavoidable, because that's just kind of pre-programmed in you, or we have learned it. Oh, I don't know. I assume it is pre-programmed, because you have to be curious to understand the world around you. You have to be curious even to pick up spirituality.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to be curious. Yes, for sure. And then our whole point here is that while being inquisitive, while being curious, while making these inquiries,
Mm.
you know, what faculties are we relying on?
Mm.
You know, yes, we use, like I said, you know, several times, we use pratyaksha and anuman, but then we want to be guided by shabda, right?
Mm.
So, okay, so we, you know, like Prabhupada says, okay, Krishna is the taste of water. We take that sentence, we accept that sentence. Okay, Krishna is the taste of water, but how is he the taste of water? Then we are using our, you know, Anuman and whatever. But your point is well taken also in the sense that, you know, we are where we are. And sometimes we just, you know, have to sometimes use a lot of logic and, you know, our senses and so on to come to the conclusion actually that I don't want to waste my time anymore using this. I want to accept Shabda, you know? So it's a process actually to come to that platform.
Right.
It's not that, yeah, it's not that we hang up our brains. No, that's not what Prabhupada says. Prabhupada repeatedly says, you know, don't follow blindly, question things. You want to question things. But then, you know, when the authority is presenting something, and we accept it, right?
Mm.
Our question is more about how is it? How does that happen? You know, I accept, but I can't figure it out. How does that happen? And how does that happen? The answer to that sometimes we can figure out using our logic, but at the times, like last week I was saying, sometimes we just really have to pray because it's descending. It's not by our endeavor. You know, I may accept a sentence and I may try to figure out all I want, but I may not understand without some revelation, right?
Right. And to extend that question further, if you talk about the concept of self-realization, the words itself suggest some level of trial and error, or like you said, until you come to the point where you decide you don't want to waste time anymore. So, like you said, it is a process. So self-realization means that you are experimenting, you may fail, and you use your experiences to arrive at the right conclusion, I suppose, hopefully.
Not necessarily. I would disagree. Because self-realization doesn't necessarily mean that I just use the faculties that I have. You know, I may use them, but again, you know, I want to be guided by Shabda to use them properly. Because God realization and self-realization happen together, as we know from our scriptures. You know, they're not separate. Of course, in the world out there, that word kind of buzzes around and they use it in a different way. And it's kind of like, I'm going to arrive somewhere using my, you know, strength, my faculties. Yeah. So, yes, you know, we all have that spirit of inquiry and everything, and we do use our senses, but using those, we can come to the conclusion that this is the highest truth. Just like there is this nice long purport in the second canto where Prabhupada and Acharyas, you know, are showing us how we can arrive to the conclusion that there is a super soul in the heart, and you know, we're so dependent every moment by this presence of super soul, you know. So he's using logic to arrive there, but it's kind of, you know, it's subtle, it's deep, and it's not easy, you know, if it's not guided. Also, you know, it should just without some higher source of information, our ability to use logic is also limited in some ways, you know. When some revelation comes sometimes, and then we are able to extend that logic further and further also, right?
Right, thank you.
Making sense, yeah. Okay, and then I just have 2 reflection exercises I want you all to, you know, kind of just take home. You all are in your homes right now, so but still take home with you. think of an instance in your life when you did not accept something an authority said, guru or sadhu or shastra, and how you paid for it in a negative way. And if there was more time, really, I would like you all to discuss this, but I think I have to just say, do it. Just try to do it at your own time. Think also of an instance when you put faith in authority, although it was difficult, and how the Vedic knowledge or authority proved to be true. It's very strengthening to discuss these kind of things and reflect on these things, because then we can go forward with deeper faith in our authorities. And we'll end with this quote. Prabhupada ends introduction with just saying originally there was one Veda and then it was divided, and he speaks about Bhagavatam and all that. So the original source of knowledge is the Vedas. There are no branches of knowledge, either mundane or transcendental, which do not belong to the original text of the Vedas. They've simply been developed into different branches. They were originally rendered by great, respectable, and learned professors. In other words, the Vedic knowledge, broken into different branches by different disciplic successions, has been distributed all over the world. No one therefore can claim independent knowledge beyond the Vedas. So that concludes our introduction. Any quick questions, comments for a few minutes? I want to finish at least invocation today. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hello.
Prabhu.
So one question about the Shruti and Smruti. I think before I think I'm assuming it. Please correct me. The Smruti came after Shruti.
Yes, that's right.
So the Smruti source is Shruti, or is it from the Vedas direct?
Yeah, Vedas are Shruti, right? So the Smriti basically means that one is remembering the Shruti and they're realizing the Shruti, and then they're writing their realizations basically. So Smriti is the realization of the sages. Okay, Uma is asking, what is the second exercise? Can you please repeat? So it's just the flip side of it, basically, that, think of an instance where you actually followed the authority, even though it was difficult to follow, perhaps. It wasn't easy for you to digest or apply or whatever, but you tried to follow it anyway. And what happened when you did that? What was your realization? How did it strengthen your faith and authority? I will share a PDF of both the PowerPoint's introduction as well as invocation, so you'll have it, okay? Okay, anything else? You are welcome, Uma. Okay, so all good. Then we'll go ahead and start the invocation prayers. It's a very short invocation, but super powerful. Okay. Are you seeing full screen or okay? You can see full screen now, right?
Yes, Mataji.
Yeah, okay. So invocation. So ISOPANISAD itself begins with mantra 1 with the word Isha. But in all our Vedic literatures, there is a rule that before beginning any important text, there is always an invocation or Mangala Charana. Sometimes it's one verse, sometimes it's several verses. But the main purpose is to bring auspiciousness, to bring focus. And you have already finished Nectar of Devotion or not yet, all of you?
Yes, we've finished.
Yeah, you
Nectar of
finished.
Devotion.
Then,
So,
Mataji.
I'm sure you learned then the components of the Mangala Charna. It's described in Nectar of Devotion by Prabhupada. So usually there's offering of obeisances to the devotees, the spiritual master, the Lord. The author is requesting for the blessings, and he's also bestowing some blessings or benedictions, what you will get from studying this particular book. And he will usually also define the subject of the book. So it's not necessary that all of the components are there in all the invocations. In this ISOPANISAD invocation, the author is mainly just defining this subject of the study, right? And this is a verse, this invocation verse is something that's found also in several other Upanishads, but it's very carefully selected, and it perfectly defines the subject of ISOPANISAD. So before we get in, just a very quick overview. So we concluded the introduction, which discussed the importance of Vedic knowledge. So from invocation to mantra 3 is like the first section, and in a simple phrase for you to remember the sections: living in harmony with God. So it's describing the relationship between the Lord and the living entities and his whole creation, and how, when you understand this properly, what will be the result, and when you don't apply it, what will be the result. And then the next 4 mantras, actually 5 mantras, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 5 mantras. Spiritual vision, the inconceivable Lord can only be known by the Mahabhagavat devotee, because the Lord is, you cannot, conceive him with your own senses. And then the next section is Vidya and Avidya, that's knowledge and nations. So there's a comparison, and there's comparing contrast and how both are needed, and how should we cultivate this knowledge. And then there's one more section. Sambhuti and Asambhuti is the next section, mantras 12 to 14. They're comparing the worship of the relative and the absolute. And finally, prayers for revelation of the Lord's spiritual form. So this is a Vedic study, as we said. It's one of the Upanishads. It belongs to the Yajurveda. It's part of the Jnana Kanda. And 90% of the Vedas are actually made up of Karma Kanda, but this section is from the Jnana Kanda. And Jnana Kanda is something that's usually studied by, the very scholarly kind of sannyasis and so on, very renounced, very scholarly. They're very, the intellectual. They like to use their Anuman a lot. So they're doing a lot of philosophical reasoning. And so actually all of the sections until the last section, they're quite philosophical. But it's only the last section, prayers for revelation of the Lord's spiritual form. It kind of more directly talks about bhakti. And it's actually very, really beautiful for devotees. So that's where we begin to find some taste. So this is Mother Urmila's overview. She has divided into vision, guidelines, and prayers. And so in the vision, she's included invocation, foundation of knowledge of Supreme Person, practices for living entities, knowledge of the Supreme Person, knowledge and practice of spiritual vision. So she's divided up slightly differently and just categorized it slightly differently, but the essences are still the same. So guidelines for knowledge, guidelines for practice, prayers for knowledge, prayers for practice. It's very application oriented. And so here's the overview of invocation to mantra 3. So invocation establishes the principle of completeness. And then mantra 1 tells us how to practice that completeness. Mantra 2 will tell us what's the positive result of such practice. And mantra 3 will tell us what's the negative result of not practicing it, right? It's very simple. So let's recite the mantra. Probably several of you already know it. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. So translation, would somebody like to read the translation? Quickly.
I can read, Mataji.
Sure.
The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete. And because he is completely perfect, all
Krishna
emanations
Mataji,
from
can I
him.
read Mataji?
He's already reading Pranavalla Prabhu.
Yeah, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, and are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself, because he is the complete whole. Even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. Thank you, Mataji.
Okay. Wonderful. How many times has the word complete been used? Anybody counted? In Sanskrit, that's 7 times. In English, I think it's 8 times. And, when we read this translation, one of two things can happen. Either you're very intrigued by it, or one may just close the book and say, what is this nonsense? How is everything complete like this? But hopefully all of us are a bit intrigued and we want to try to understand how this is so. So this mantra is telling us the world is complete and perfect. Again, it's either a surprise or a shock or a relief. So what are the different parts of the completeness? There's 4 categories over here. The Supreme Absolute Truth, he's complete. The phenomenal world, that's complete. The living entities are complete and perfect. And there is a complete arrangement. So let's look at each of these categories. So when you look at your word-to-word translation, Prabhupada translates Om as complete whole, right? But then when you look at the translation, he changes that to personality of Godhead or Supreme Personality of Godhead. So is that a problem? Is this correct? Is Prabhupada correct or not in translating Om as personality of Godhead? I think last week we were also talking about how one devotee asks, actually, Prabhupada, in this translation, there is no Krishna mentioned, but how are you bringing in Krishna? And Prabhupada said, yes, that's my specialty. I can reveal Krishna in these verses. So Prabhupada always translated these books so that, based on the conclusion, so that we don't get lost. Whichever portion we are reading, he will make sure that we actually get the conclusion. So is Prabhupada right or wrong in translating Om as Supreme Personality of Godhead?
Right, Mataji.
Right only, Mataji.
Right. Okay, right only. Prove it to me. How? Right.
Because in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that I am the Om.
Very good. Very good. Yes, Krishna does say he is Om. And in fact, Shankaracharya, he doesn't translate ISOPANISAD because all these mantras, they can only be understood impersonally if certain mantras are extracted out of the book. But when one reads the whole book, one cannot actually come to the impersonal conclusion. So this is one of our aims, academic and moral integrity, right? So the meaning of the verses have to be based on the context. So Bhagavad Gita says many things about Om. I'm the syllable Om in Vedic mantras. I'm the syllable Om again in the 9th chapter of vibrations. I'm the transcendental Om. And then there's 2 things Krishna says, that if you chant Om and you think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and you quit your body, then you attain the spiritual planets. But if you chant Omkara and, you have this impersonal kind of conception, then, you enter into Brahman. And then also in the 17th chapter, there's this word, 3 words, Om Tat Sat. And they were always used to indicate the supreme absolute truth. And the Brahmanas would utter this word Om during all the different yajnas and sacrifices or charities or penances to indicate that this is an offering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Om is Krishna himself, as you said, but usually the way the word Om is used is to represent the impersonal part of Krishna. But we understand that it doesn't mean only that. So, okay. It's clearly stated here that Om, Brahman, and Lord Krishna are not different. The impersonal sound of Krishna is Om, but the sound Hare Krishna contains Om. The chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra is clearly recommended for this age. So let's look at the complete absolute truth. So there's, again, Prabhupada talks about 4 parts: Sat, Chit, Ananda, Vigraha. So Sat is the eternal impersonal nature of the Lord, or Brahma Jyoti. All of you know this. I'm going to go through this very quickly. Chit is the knowledge aspect. And, when you're realized in Chit, there's a revelation of form of the Lord as Paramatma. And then there's Ananda or bliss. And you can get the Ananda realization when you realize Bhagavan. And it includes Paramatma and Brahmajyoti, right? And then Prabhupada also comments on form. And what does Prabhupada say about form in this purport? How does he prove actually that the Lord is personal, just using this one word? So Vigraha means form, right? So he makes the argument that complete means it should include everything. Everything means everything within our experience and even beyond our experience. We have a form. So if the Absolute does not have a form, he would be less than us in some way. And how is that possible, right? He should have everything that we have and more within what I can see and beyond what I can see and hear and know. That's Supreme Personality of Godhead. So just using just this part, you can establish that the Lord is personal. He has a form. And so there's several themes in ISOPANISAD, and defeating impersonalism is one of them. And your essays, I'm going to send them to you today or tomorrow. But your essays cover one of the themes. So there's a little chart here. This chart you will find in your student handbook. And basically the different themes of ISOPANISAD are on this side and where you can find them. The page numbers are given, but these page numbers may be a little off with the new editions of the new prints of ISOPANISAD. But still, I'm showing you this chart because it's a very useful chart when you're writing essays. So if you pick an essay which is focusing on the aim of knowledge, you know where to look for some clues, or defeating impersonalism, like that. And make sure that when you write your essays, you're actually addressing this particular aim that you picked, right? Or the theme. And one comment also about essays. I mean, I think your group is pretty regular because Navdeep Sachi Mataji is, I think, on top of things. But try not to procrastinate writing essays. I would recommend that once you get the essay topics, you try to just pick one. And as we are going along, you can actually already start making your points. And then in the end, you just kind of tidy it up and tie it together and you're all done. All right. There's many students, sometimes they'll just put it off for the end and then the essay kind of never gets done. And then they don't finish their Bhakti Shastri. So that was Purnam Ada. Ada means that which lies beyond. And then Idam. Idam means this phenomenal world or material world. So there's Ada and Idam. They're like codes in the Vedas. So how is this phenomenal or material world complete? So basically everything that's happening is happening according to Krishna's plan for a reason. So in that sense, it's complete. Nothing is whimsical. It has a full purpose and it's perfect. It's complete and perfect. Also, there's no kind of external arrangement necessary for maintenance or subsistence. There's self-sustained cycles like, day and night or seasons, birth and death, right? In the beginning, some of the scientists thought that things were just disappearing or something. Then they realized, oh, actually it's cycling, it's conservation of energy. And then there is 24 elements that this material world is made up of. And these elements are also circling around by the power of time. And time is the other component of how this material world is complete. Time has its own, everything has its own time cycle. Time, as we know, is the external feature of supersolar Paramatma. And time pushes everything forward. We cannot, purchase even a second with any amount of wealth, as we know. And after Brahma creates, he's usually engaged in meditating and study of the Vedas. He studied the Vedas scrutinizingly like 3 times. Second canto describes this. And then he ascertained that attraction to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate perfection that we want. So he creates, and then he's engaged in this meditation and study of Vedas. It's not like he has to really do a lot of management after that. Everything kind of happens by its, its own cycles, and it's self-sustained. One generation after another, it goes on by itself, right? Whether it's the sun, the ocean, so many examples. I also shared yesterday, I think Navdeep Sachi Mataji shared this book of quotes by Srila Prabhupada, connected to ISOPANISAD. They're really, really nice. They're so enlivening. I would encourage all of you to please read these nice quotes of Prabhupada. There's many, many examples there of like the ocean, Prabhupada. I think I have a slide for it, maybe. Yeah, here. I can't see the top part. Okay. 1 minus 1 equals 1, not 0. 1 plus 1 equals 1, not 2. This is complete. This is the idea of God. Just like the ocean, you may take many thousands of buckets of water. It's complete. And again, you may put many buckets, thousands, millions buckets of water. It's the same depth. This is another example, material example. This is complete. You take millions of buckets of water from the ocean, you'll find not a drop is lost. And you put millions of buckets of water again, not a drop is increased. Purnasya purnamadaya purnameva vashishyate. If you try to take out the whole ocean, still it will remain the ocean. This is the idea of complete. And another example of nature's arrangement. As soon as a child is born, immediately there's milk. And that's nature's arrangement, complete arrangement. There's enough milk. Then how is the living entity complete? The living entity over here is referring to the soul and not the body. So basically all facilities that are required for realizing the complete whole is there within a living entity. And we are not incomplete, but we experience incompleteness because of our disconnection from the Lord. And Prabhupada gives the analogy of the hand and the body. He says the hand of a body is a complete unit only as long as it's attached to the complete body. When the hand is severed from the body, it may appear like a hand, but it actually has none of the potencies of a hand. Similarly, living beings are part and parcel of the complete whole, and if they're severed from the complete whole, the illusory representation of completeness cannot fully satisfy them. So we are not incomplete, but we are experiencing incompleteness because of our disconnection. And I love this sentence, which appears also in the Bhagavad Gita in the preface. All forms of incompleteness are due to the incomplete knowledge of the complete whole. So you've heard this example many times, I'm sure most of you. But it's something wonderful to deeply meditate upon, whether it's a screw in a machine. Once the screw falls down, the screw itself, you're walking on the road, you see a screw and you don't care much for it. But once upon a time, it served a very important purpose in that machine. When I was in school, one time my sister was cutting something and she actually cut her finger. Literally, her finger was, her index finger. She cut the tip of it, like sliced it off completely. And I just I was in medical school that time. And so I just put that slice in a bag with ice and I rushed her to the hospital immediately. It served an important purpose, that little part of her finger, but then in the Ziploc bag, it has no purpose. But once it was sewed back, she's fine now, she's healed nicely. But once it was sewed back, it has such an important purpose. And so much to say about this topic. I'm trying to compose my thoughts, but so we are complete. The living entities are complete when our consciousness is complete. And that can happen only when we are actually connected to the Lord in service. When we remain in contact with the Supreme Lord through devotional service, we feel complete because our consciousness is connected. And we've all had, this experience in our practice, right? Very practically. Sometimes we're just feeling so dissatisfied inside and so empty that, we're just consumed by anything and everything. We're triggered by anything and everything, and just so much unhappiness. But there are other times when there is a lot going on in life, maybe many difficulties, many obstacles, but we're very connected. Our sadhana is very strong, our hearing, our chanting, our reading, we're really deeply connected to the devotional process. And therefore we're connected to Krishna. And then we feel okay. We feel complete. We feel like, yeah, all these obstacles are there, but nothing is lacking actually. And really, as Prabhupada in the end also sums it up, we'll get there. But, any form of incompleteness that we feel, that's only because of not having sufficient God consciousness, whether it's health or whether it's relationships or any area of our life, anywhere where we feel this sense of incompleteness, it's actually because of lack of God consciousness. Like you all know the example of Prabhupada when he met Bhaktisiddhanta, right? And he asked him to preach this process. Prabhupada was thinking, who's going to accept this process right now while the independence movement is going on? And Bhaktisiddhanta at that time said, well, the only thing lacking really is God consciousness. Everything else is quite external. It does feel like, yeah, I have to finish this and then get to Krishna consciousness, right? It feels like that sometimes, let me finish this, let me finish that, and then I will practice Krishna consciousness. But actually those things will never get completed. It's only Krishna consciousness that will help us complete everything else, right? So it's something to deeply think about. For many, many years, I used to have this phrase on my wall, all forms of incompleteness are due to incomplete knowledge of the complete whole. And then Prabhupada writes here in Invocation, he says that the human form of life is a complete manifestation of the consciousness of the living being. And it's obtained after evolving through 8.4 million species of life in a cycle of birth and death. So, certainly we all have a human form of life. We've evolved through so many species. We don't know where all we've been, but we are here. And if we blow it this time, because it is only in this human form of life that our consciousness can experience this completeness. In no other form we can actually experience this completeness, right? So let's not blow it. Let's take it seriously. And then the complete arrangement, which is the fourth part of this completeness. The human form of life and devotional service together. So this is the perfect arrangement, because we know that the living entity automatically comes to human form from animal species, and then he can take up the devotional service. This is the complete arrangement. And many people, they don't like philosophy because their intelligence is not awakened. But when intelligence is awakened by hearing the Shastras, people, like philosophy because it really puts everything in place, as we're seeing right now. Simple invocation, but everything is just so nicely tied together. So Prabhupada's quote here, we make efforts to utilize the resources of nature to create a so-called complete life of sense enjoyment. Illusory representation of completeness cannot fully satisfy us. So we all know this all too well, and it never hurts actually to reflect on this more deeply in our, everyday life. This is also another very nice quote here. So if you want to get out of this entanglement, there is complete arrangement, facility, complete facility. Those who are engaged in devotional service, Krishna says, I take personal charge for their maintenance. This is complete arrangement. Just look to the karmi world. Now, so far we are concerned, we have to pay installment, $2,000 for this house, and we have to spend another $2,000 for our maintenance. So $4,000, $5,000 we're spending. Can any karmi depend like that? Take practical example. Can they depend for paying $5,000 bills without any arrangement? They will have no sleep at night. And we are freely moving because we are sure that Krishna will provide, and he is providing. Anyway, and he goes on. So this is the complete facility. Krishna consciousness is the complete facility. So this is the technique of Krishna consciousness, that if you learn how to love Krishna, then you will love everything. Otherwise, your love will be localized and you'll be frustrated. It's most scientific. And our process is very simple. Chant Hare Krishna, that's all. So chanting means you're associating with Krishna. That means you're directly in touch with the root of everything. So by advancing in love for Krishna, you can love your society, your country, your community, your family, your husband, your wife, your children, your friend, everything complete. Purnam. Purnamada, Purnamidam. And that love will never be ended. Purna. Love of Krishna is so complete that you just go on distributing this love. It'll never be expended. It'll remain the same. How beautiful. And that's what Prabhupada is saying in the end. This is the perfect sentence connecting us to the next verse, verse 1. All services in this world, whether social, political, communal, international, or even interplanetary, will remain incomplete until they're dovetailed with the complete whole. So again, I want to leave you all with these questions. This is something I really miss. When we do classes on Zoom, it's just really hard to make it sufficiently interactive. But if we were doing this class in person, we would do all these exercises together. So think about these questions, write them down, I would say. how do you feel most incomplete? What are the imperfections that you most sorely feel about? Please write them down. It will help a lot. And then, how do you try to fulfill these imperfections or needs in a material way to feel complete? What are the problems caused you to this? How can Krishna consciousness make you feel complete? Explain how this need is ultimately spiritual in nature. And of all the questions, I would say this last question is the most important for me, or something that I really would like you all to, take into your chanting. How can I feel complete through this opportunity of connecting with Krishna in the form of the holy name? Because that's actually a time when we can deeply, deeply connect with Krishna. It's our time with Krishna. And how can I feel complete? In fact, after answering the first question, take those things that you feel so incomplete about, or you feel so sorely about, take those and bring them to your chanting and just chant deeply and see how your perception of that incompleteness actually changes after you chant nicely. So we could discuss much more, but in Bhakti Shastri classes, we have to keep a pace. So, and I'm looking at the time, it is 11:30, but perhaps if there is a quick question or two, I'll just take 2 or 3 minutes, not too much. Or any quick comment. If there's other questions, we can do in the beginning of next class too. Okay, there's nothing. Either all of you are self-realized, or I have successfully put everyone to sleep.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
And Krishna.
One question, Mataji. How do we build the faith in Shabda? Like we.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Can you hear me, Mataji?
There's some disturbance. Try again. Try not to move and just speak.
Okay. Hare Krishna Mataji. Can you hear me?
Yes, you do.
So how can I there are three forms, right? The gaining the knowledge in Pratyaksha Pramana, but the sound, hearing the sound, we are giving stress on it. The faith on the sound, how do I strengthen that? What is the best? How do I improve that? I think I have a weakness in not having faith in the sound rather than following, like looking at normal things that has a faith compared to the sound. So how do I build strength on that?
Yeah. So I think I would just say 2 quick things. Of course, we can give a long answer, but 2 quick things. One is whatever you have heard, through the right source, right? Take 1 or 2 small things and just try to apply it and see the result for yourself, right? That's one way. Because when you take a little thing and you apply it, then your faith grows. And then you can go back and hear more deeply, or, read more deeply. The second is just that try to just do it because, the spiritual master is saying so, or the Shastra is saying so, but also using your intellect, you are understanding today very clearly that Shabda Praman is the highest. So then kind of just give it a shot. That's what I would say, that just read Shastra. Read Shastra with that, openness in your consciousness. Just allow Krishna to show himself. Sometimes we don't give space for Krishna, but maybe we can just give that little space. That maybe it's true. It doesn't have to be like, I believe that this is true, but let me just give it a chance. Maybe it's true. let me give Shastra a chance. Let me give Krishna a chance and just read maybe 15 minutes every day or half an hour every day. And you can see then what happens to your consciousness, right? I mean, without a doubt, if you read every day for half an hour, you're going to be super enlivened by the end of the week. Yes.
Yeah.
But it can be a longer discussion, but I'll stop there. Don't
Thank you,
want
Mataji.
to go beyond time. It's 11:35, so we'll stop. And for next week, you can try to read mantras 1 and 2. And I don't think I'll be able to finish 3 because mantra 1 is a little bit more involved. So, and then we'll quickly try to finish mantra 2. Okay. Thank you very much. And I'll share these PowerPoints, so don't worry about the questions and all that. Hare Krishna. Have a wonderful Krishna conscious week.